The train cut through the gray morning like a blade through fog. Elena sat by the window, her reflection flickering between fields and shadows, her eyes hollow from another sleepless night. Her phone buzzed in her lap, the screen lighting up with her mother's name. She stared at it for a long moment before turning it face down. She couldn't answer. Not yet. Not after everything that happened. She told herself she was leaving to find freedom, to find herself. But deep down, she knew she was running. From expectations, from guilt, from the tiny town that had always whispered about her father's mistakes and her mother's sacrifices. That town was a cage disguised as home, and Elena was desperate to breathe. Her mother, Nadia, had spent her life holding things together: the old house, the fading garden, the memories of a husband who never came back. She raised Elena with hands that worked until they bled and a heart that forgave too easily. "You have to go," she'd said through trembling lips when Elena first talked about leaving for the city. "But promise me. Promise you won't forget where you came from." Elena had promised. But promises, she'd learned, were easy to make when you still believed in forever. The city was nothing like the stories. It was louder, faster, crueler. The first night, she slept in a rented apartment with peeling paint and a leaky faucet. It smelled like old smoke and lost dreams. But to her, it was paradise, a place where no one knew her name. She started working as an assistant in a photography studio, cleaning lenses, fetching coffee, doing anything to stay close to the art she loved. Her dream was to become a photographer, to capture beauty, emotion, and truth in a world that often hid them. Every weekend, her mother called. Sometimes Elena answered. Sometimes she didn't. "Are you eating well? Do you have friends there? When will you visit?" Each question felt like a stone placed on her chest. "Soon," she'd say. "I'm just busy." Nadia never complained. She just said, "I'm proud of you." Even when her voice cracked on the last word. Months passed. Elena climbed higher in the studio. She began taking portraits, assisting on campaigns, even earning her first paycheck that didn't vanish immediately into rent. But with each step upward, she felt something slipping away. The laughter she once shared with her mother faded into background noise. Her hometown became a ghost she refused to remember. One evening, while editing photos in the dim light of her apartment, Elena stumbled upon an image from home, an old snapshot of her and her mother planting flowers in the backyard. The edges were worn, the colors faded, but the warmth in their smiles cut deep. For a moment, she almost called her. Almost. But then her phone buzzed again. This time it was her boss. "Elena, we need you early tomorrow. Big client. Don't be late." So she didn't call. She buried the photo under a pile of papers and went back to work. That night, she dreamed of her mother standing in the garden, calling her name through the fog. Weeks turned into months. The studio grew busier. Elena met people who dazzled her: models, artists, creators who seemed to float through life without fear. One of them, Daniel, was everything she thought she wanted: confident, charming, full of stories about the world. He saw potential in her. "You've got an eye," he told her once as they reviewed her work. "You could be something great if you stop clinging to the past." It sounded like freedom. So she listened. Daniel introduced her to a world she'd only dreamed of: rooftop parties, gallery nights, people who spoke in ideas instead of feelings. She started dressing differently, talking differently. When her mother called, she often let it ring. When she finally answered, her words came out colder, shorter. "I'm fine, Mom. Really, just tired." But Nadia could always hear what Elena didn't say. "I love you," she whispered at the end of every call. "Don't lose yourself, my girl." Elena rolled her eyes sometimes. "I'm not losing myself, Mom. I'm finding who I am." Then came the night that changed everything. The studio landed a massive campaign, an international client that could make careers. Elena worked tirelessly for weeks, barely sleeping, barely eating. Her name was finally going to appear on the credits. It was everything she dreamed of. The night before the presentation, she got another call from home, her mother again. But this time, Elena ignored it. She couldn't deal with another emotional talk before the biggest moment of her life. The call went to voicemail. Then another came, and another. Finally, she silenced her phone. When she woke the next morning, she saw 10 missed calls, all from home, and a message from a number she didn't recognize. Her hands shook as she opened it. "This is the Riverton Hospital. Please contact us immediately regarding your mother." The world fell silent. The next few hours were a blur. Trains, tears, unanswered prayers. She arrived at the hospital just after sunset, the sky bleeding into shades of sorrow. Her mother lay in the sterile white room, pale but peaceful, her breathing shallow. The doctor said it had been sudden, heart failure, brought on by exhaustion. She kept asking for you, he added softly. Elena's knees buckled. She took her mother's hand, calloused, still warm, and whispered through sobs, I'm here. Mom, I'm here now. But Nadia didn't wake up that night. Elena sat alone in the hospital corridor, the smell of antiseptic burning her lungs. She scrolled through her messages, so many she'd ignored. Good morning, sweetheart. Don't forget your scarf. I love you. The words blurred into each other until all she could see was what she'd lost. The next morning, she packed her mother's things. Among them was a small envelope with her name written in delicate cursive. Inside was a single photograph, that same garden picture, and a note that read, You were never meant to chase the world, my love. The world was meant to find you when you learned to stop running. That night, Elena returned to the house she once called home. Everything was smaller now, the walls, the rooms, the silence. She stood in the garden, now overgrown and wild, and sank to her knees. The stars were cold above her, and the air smelled like rain and regret. For the first time in years, she cried without restraint. And for the first time, the silence didn't scare her. It felt like her mother was there, not in the house, not in the ground, but in the wind that carried her name. The house felt foreign, even though every corner remembered her. Elena wandered through its halls like a stranger trespassing through her own memories. Dust coated the furniture, and the faint scent of jasmine, her mother's favorite, lingered in the air, almost as if the walls refused to let her go. She found her old room exactly as she had left it, the faded posters, the chipped desk, the camera her mother bought her when she was 16. It sat on the shelf, untouched and silent, like it had been waiting. She picked it up, brushing her fingers across its worn leather grip. For a moment, she could almost hear her mother's voice. Every photo you take should come from your heart, not your eyes. Elena pressed the camera to her chest and exhaled a shaky breath. Her mother had always believed in her more than she ever believed in herself. That night, she couldn't sleep. The silence was heavy, pressing against her ribs. She sat by the window, staring out at the moonlit garden. The flowers had wilted, the soil cracked, but somehow it still looked beautiful. Maybe that's what love did. It stayed, even when everything else faded. The guilt came in waves. Every message she hadn't answered. Every, I'll call you later, she never did. Every second she thought she had more time. Regret was a cruel companion. It whispered all the things you can't undo. The next morning, Elena went into town to make arrangements. People recognized her. They offered condolences in soft voices, the kind that made her want to disappear. Your mother was such a kind soul, they said, always talking about how proud she was of you. Elena nodded, forcing a smile that hurt more than tears. Proud. That word sliced deep. Proud of what? The daughter who left and never came back? She visited the florist to buy white lilies for the funeral. The shopkeeper, an old man with gentle eyes, handed her the bouquet and said quietly, She used to come here every Sunday. Always bought the same flowers. Said they reminded her of hope. Elena managed a trembling thank you and left before he could see her cry. The funeral was small. A handful of neighbors, her mother's friends, and people from the church. The priest spoke about kindness, patience, and love, things that had defined her mother's life. When it was Elena's turn to speak, she froze. Her throat closed around the words she'd been rehearsing all night. All she could manage was a whisper. I thought I had more time. The crowd bowed their heads, and in that moment, silence felt like a punishment. After the burial, she stayed long after everyone had gone. She sat beside the grave, tracing her mother's name carved in stone. The world around her was painfully still, the rustle of leaves, the distant sound of birds, the whisper of wind. And then, something strange happened. A single feather drifted down from above, landing softly on her lap. She stared at it for a long moment, her chest tightening. Maybe it was nothing. Or maybe it was her mother's way of saying, I'm still here. Days passed in slow motion. Elena stayed in the house, avoiding calls, ignoring the city that once seemed so important. Her boss left messages about deadlines, projects, clients. But she couldn't bring herself to care. None of it mattered anymore. One evening, while cleaning out her mother's closet, she found an old box labeled for Elena. Inside were dozens of letters, some opened, some sealed. Her mother had written them over the years, but never sent them. Her hands trembled as she opened the first one. My dear Elena, sometimes I wake up wondering where you are, what you're eating, if you're warm. I tell myself you're happy. Even when I miss you so much it hurts. I don't want to hold you back. I just want to be part of your life, even from afar. Don't let the world change your heart. It's your kindness that makes you strong. Elena pressed the letter to her chest, sobbing silently. One by one, she read through them all: birthday wishes, small updates about home, even letters written after she'd stopped answering calls. Each one carried the same message: unconditional love. The final letter was dated only a week before her mother's death. I had a dream about you last night. You were taking pictures of stars. You looked happy. Maybe that means I can stop worrying so much. Just remember, even when you feel alone, you're still my light. Always will be. That night, Elena cried until dawn. The next morning, something inside her shifted. For the first time in weeks, she picked up her camera and stepped outside. The garden was wild and tangled, but the sunlight filtered through the leaves in golden ribbons. She began to photograph everything: the dew on petals, the cracks in the old fence, the empty chair by the porch. Through the lens, the world seemed softer, like it was healing with her. Day by day, she found small reasons to keep going. She started volunteering at the community center her mother used to visit, teaching kids how to use disposable cameras. Their laughter filled the halls, and sometimes, when she looked at them, she felt her mother's presence and the joy around her. Still, at night, the loneliness returned. Grief wasn't something you escaped. It was something you learned to live with. And forgiveness, she realized, wasn't about the past. It was about learning to love again, even when it hurt. Weeks turned into months. Elena started rebuilding her photography portfolio, but this time, her work was different. She no longer chased glamour or perfection. She captured honesty, the lines on people's faces, the tenderness in small gestures, the beauty in imperfection. Each photo felt like a conversation with her mother. Then, one afternoon, she received an email from a local gallery. They had seen her recent work online and wanted to feature her in a small exhibition titled Fragments of Home. At first, she hesitated. The thought of showing her pain to the world felt terrifying. But then she remembered the words in her mother's letter: your kindness makes you strong. So she said yes. The night of the exhibition arrived. The gallery was modest but warm, the walls lined with her photographs, each one telling a piece of her journey. People moved slowly, whispering, pointing, feeling. One image drew the most attention: her mother's chair in the garden, surrounded by blooming lilies. Beneath it, the caption read, "She never left." As the evening went on, a woman approached Elena. She looked to be in her 50s, kind eyes behind wire-framed glasses. Your work, it feels alive, she said softly. There's so much love in your pain. Elena smiled faintly. It's all I have left to give. The woman nodded. Then it's enough. For the first time in a long while, Elena felt peace, not the absence of sorrow, but the acceptance of it. She realized that her mother's love hadn't disappeared. It had simply changed form, finding new ways to guide her. When she returned home that night, the moon hung low above the garden. The air was cool and still. She stood by her mother's grave and whispered, I hope you saw it, Mom. I finally found what you meant. A breeze swept through the flowers, brushing against her hair. She smiled through tears. Maybe it was her imagination. Maybe not. Inside the house, she hung her camera by the window and turned off the lights. The shadows no longer frightened her. She sat on the edge of her bed, opened her laptop, and began to write. To the woman who taught me how to love, lose, and begin again, this is for you. The words poured out easily this time. They weren't perfect, but they were real. And for the first time, that was enough. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the window, golden and soft. The garden was alive again, filled with colors she hadn't noticed in years. She stepped outside barefoot, feeling the earth beneath her feet, grounding her. Life hadn't turned back to normal. It never would. But it had found rhythm again, slower, quieter. Truer.as, she lifted her camera and took one more picture of the morning light. She whispered to herself, I'm not running anymore. And somewhere, in the rustle of leaves, she could almost hear her mother's voice reply, "Welcome home." A year had passed since her mother's death, yet some days it still felt like yesterday. Elena had rebuilt her life piece by piece, slowly, carefully, tenderly. The house that once echoed with silence now hummed with quiet life. The garden her mother loved had returned to bloom, a sea of color that changed with the seasons. It wasn't perfect, but it was alive, just like her. She had learned that grief didn't fade. It softened. It became something she carried gently instead of something that crushed her. It became a story she could tell without falling apart. Her photography career had changed, too. The small gallery show had led to unexpected attention. Emails from art magazines, collaborations, even an offer to teach at a local university. But the most meaningful thing came from the people who reached out after seeing her photos. Messages filled her inbox, strangers who said her work had helped them grieve, remember, or forgive. One message stood out. "Your photo of the empty chair reminded me of my father. I visit it every morning just to sit beside it. Thank you for helping me see that love never really leaves." That single message made her cry for an hour. It was the first time she realized her pain had become a bridge for others to cross their own. That on a quiet Sunday morning, she sat on the porch sipping coffee, sunlight dancing across her skin. Her best friend, Marcus, arrived holding a newspaper and a bag of pastries. They'd known each other since college, back before ambition had pulled her away from everything simple. He had always been the steady one, the one who called when everyone else forgot, who sent postcards even when she never replied. "Guess who made the Sunday Times?" he said with a grin, tossing the paper onto her lap. There, on the cover of the arts section, was her photograph, the one of the lilies by her mother's grave, with the headline, "Finding Home: How Grief Became Her Art." Elena laughed softly, shaking her head. "You're kidding." "Nope," Marcus said, settling beside her. "You've officially made it. The Poetic Queen of Pain." "Wow, thanks for that title." He smiled. "Hey, some of us spend years just trying to feel what you capture in one shot." She looked out at the garden, her voice soft. "I didn't do it for recognition. I just didn't know how else to survive." Marcus nodded. "That's what makes it real. You didn't chase beauty. You found it." They sat in silence for a while, listening to the hum of bees, the rustle of the wind, the pulse of life continuing. After a moment, he said, "You know, your mom would be proud." Elena's throat tightened, but she managed to smile. "Yeah, I think she is." A few weeks later, she received an invitation from a National Arts Foundation. They were hosting an exhibition on resilience through creation, and they wanted her as a guest speaker. Her first instinct was to refuse. Public speaking terrified her, but then she remembered the words her mother used to repeat whenever she doubted herself. "The world needs your light, even when you think it's small." So she said yes. The night of the event, she stood backstage trembling, her camera hanging like an anchor around her neck. The auditorium buzzed with conversation, artists, students, journalists. When her name was called, the lights felt blinding. She stepped forward, took a deep breath, and began. "At first, I thought grief was something to escape," she said, her voice steady but soft. "I tried to outrun it with work, noise, and movement, but it always found me. It wasn't until I stopped running that I realized grief wasn't my enemy. It was my teacher." She paused, scanning the faces before her. "I used to photograph things because I wanted to impress people. Now, I take pictures to remember what love looks like after loss. My mother taught me that love doesn't end. It just changes shape. Sometimes it becomes art." A stillness filled the room. People leaned forward, listening not to her words, but to the truth beneath them. And for the first time, Elena wasn't performing. She was sharing. When she finished, the audience stood and applauded. Not for fame, not for beauty, but for honesty. In that sound, Elena heard something she hadn't in a long time: belonging. After the speech, a young girl approached her, maybe 17 or 18, clutching a small sketchbook. "Your story, it reminded me of my mom," she said, tears glistening in her eyes. "She passed away last year. I haven't drawn since. But hearing you talk, it made me want to start again." Elena smiled and gently took the girl's hand. "Then draw for her. Let her see the world through your lines. That's how love stays alive." The girl nodded, and for a brief moment, Elena saw her younger self reflected there. the same pain, the same yearning, the same need for connection. It was as if her mother's kindness had found a new way to move through the world, touching others through her. Months passed, and life found rhythm again. She traveled to small towns, teaching workshops on photography and emotional storytelling. She started a community project called Through Their Eyes, helping people use art to process grief. What began with a few local participants soon grew into a global initiative. Messages, photos, and stories shared across continents. People from every background, every loss, every kind of love contributed. One night, while sorting through submissions, Elena stumbled on a photograph from a woman in Italy. It showed a little girl planting flowers beside a gravestone. The caption read, "Because she taught me that beauty belongs where love once lived." Elena stared at it for a long time. Her chest ached, not with sadness, but gratitude. Her mother's lesson had traveled farther than she could have imagined. Then one spring morning, while watering the garden, she heard the laughter of children next door. A young family had moved in. A couple with two small kids who played under the same oak tree she had once climbed as a girl. Watching them, she felt something warm stir in her. Life was continuing, not to replace what was lost, but to honor it. She walked inside and took out her camera, snapping photos through the open window, the children chasing bubbles, the sunlight catching their smiles. Later, she printed one of the photos and placed it beside her mother's picture on the mantel. "See, Mom?" she whispered. "There's still joy here." Years later, Elena's name became known in the art world, not for fame or style, but for honesty. Her exhibitions traveled across countries. Her workshops filled auditoriums. Yet she never left the small house or the garden. She said it kept her grounded. Reporters often asked what inspired her the most, and she always gave the same answer. "My mother taught me how to see." One evening, after a long day teaching, she sat outside under the fading sky, notebook in hand. She began to write a letter, not to anyone in particular, but to the girl she once was. "Dear younger me, you will lose things you think you can't live without. You will break in ways you never expected. But one day, you'll look at the world and see beauty in the cracks. You'll understand that love doesn't vanish, it transforms. And when it does, you'll realize you were never truly alone." She signed it simply, "With love, Elena." As twilight settled over the garden, fireflies began to glow among the lilies. The air smelled of jasmine again. She tilted her head back, eyes closed, feeling the evening breeze brush against her cheeks like a gentle touch. For the first time, she didn't wish for anything more. Not the past, not what could have been. Just this quiet, full moment of peace. The world kept turning, time kept moving, but love, her mother's love, remained. Not in a grave, not in a photograph, but in every life it had touched through her. And in that moment, Elena understood the truest lesson her mother had ever given her. We are remembered not by what we leave behind, but by how deeply we loved while we were here. The stars blinked awake one by one. Elena lifted her camera, focused on the night sky, and pressed the shutter. The flash was soft, like a heartbeat that said, "She's still here."